Aloha, this is Aaron Shorn, and welcome to the Unrulr Podcast, where we talk to students and educators about what matters most to them. I'm here with Dana Jones, who is the Learning Through Interest Coordinator and Advisor at North Bay Met, a big picture learning school in California. Dana, thank you so much for being on this program.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Dana, a question we always ask at some point in the conversation is, what's your philosophy of education?
I would say my philosophy of education is that students should drive their own learning. I think that, just in general, kids are always curious, and that sometimes education has a way of kind of, I guess, forgive the term, but beating the curiosity out of them.
Yeah.
So.
What does that look like in practice for you? Like, it's a beautiful statement. How do you turn that into something that is replicatable?
Because we are a big picture learning school, we have a lot of latitude in terms of that, because families who choose to come to our school are choosing that philosophical practice. So for me, it's a lot of questioning. When a student comes in and, they say, I'm interested in cars, then it's like, well, what kind of cars? When, like what year, what decade, what type, or is it trucks, is it cars, is it, hot rods, it's this. And then my job is to get them to go out on an internship, or what we call Learning Through Interest, LTI, and have them work with a real world mentor and get more knowledge about that. Because you may think you like cars, and then you go out and you do it and you're like, this sucks, I don't want to do this. And then it's my job as an advisor to pivot and go, okay, well, you don't like that. What do you, is there something else? Because some kids like body work, or a lot of times it's a lot of the interests are things that they see on TV. And TV is beautiful because it edits things and, whatever. So they're like, oh, I can go work on this car and it'll only take me 45 minutes. And it's like, no, it takes you like 3 weeks or 5 weeks or longer than that. And they go, oh, this is not fun. So I think for educators, it's our job to be flexible. And I think a lot of school systems don't allow that. So I like being at the school because it allows me to pivot with the students, which is fun, and I get to learn things. And I think that's probably what's extended my teaching career, is the fact that I'm learning now along with the students, and they're my teachers.
I love that. We did a podcast with Kwaku Anning, who's an educator in San Diego, and Mike Yates, who's amazing. He helps run the Reinvention Lab for Teach for America. And we talked about this idea of a collective. And all the three of us are obsessed with the Soulquarians and D'Angelo and Erykah Badu and all these musicians that formed a collective, right? They had different technical skills. They came together to create each other's music. What you're describing is a collective. You're a learner with your students, right? And there's this authentic relationship. Has that level of authenticity been really important for you in this style of teaching?
Yeah, because when I have, we call the term like unschooling. Because we get a lot of kids. Well, and the adults needed to do it too, right? So the students need to do it because they're used to, sitting in rows, and the person in the front of the room is the person with all the knowledge. And, for us, it's like, no, you have knowledge, right? Because they have personal experience. And, I have a lot of students who know a lot more about a lot of things than I do. And so for me, sitting and listening to them, especially when it's something that they're really passionate about, is kind of fun. But in the beginning, it was hard. I don't think it was hard for me, but it was hard for some of my colleagues to kind of allow the student to drive the education. And, because we're not taught that. And I even tried to
shift the power balance almost.
Right. And I tried, but there's still power. I mean, I don't know if there's power, right? It's because to me, I'm on the educational journey with the student, right? So we're in partnership is more. And I
like
believe that in, schools that teach teachers how to teach, there is this belief that I am the talking head in front of the room that is supposed to, bestow my knowledge on these children. And they're supposed to, thank you very much. Wow, that was so great. Let me furiously take notes for 45 minutes or something like that. And for me, it was like, oh, it was such a breath of fresh air to move to this philosophy, because the idea that I can just go along with the students, and that doesn't mean they're not getting challenged with rigor and they have to prove, right? We're moving toward a competency-based system. So we really want the students to prove, like, how well do you know what you know? When you change the oil, do you have like this, kind of an encyclopedia of like the different weights of the oil, or do you know the tools that need to be used, or, that kind of thing? Or are you just like, oh, I changed the oil, right? Because anybody can say that, right? I know this because I read it in a book or something like that. And it's like, we want to know what the practical hands-on knowledge that you have.
I love that. I mean, I'm obsessed with metacognition. Learners
Mm-hmm.
being able to display and grapple with learning and where they're at. How has metacognition played a role in the classes you work with, or in the kind of learning through interest initiatives that you're doing?
You probably need to get more specific.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. I'm gonna phrase this around process versus product, like
Okay.
and how a learner displays their understanding of process, or grapples with the journey that they go on and not just the outcome. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, for me, it's all about evidence, right? So it's like, if you can fix the car, then bring the car to me. As you know, we use Unrulr, and that is one of our document gathering or evidence gathering tools. So especially for the Learning Through Interest program, so students are going out and they're showing what they're learning.
Yeah.
Um, and because, to be perfectly honest, unless I went to the site
Yep.
and was worked with the student and the mentor, I didn't know what the student was learning. I mean, they could tell me, but what I have found, especially through the implementation of Unrulr, is that the kids don't remember everything, like,
Yeah.
or it becomes so rote for them, or not rote, but just automatic, that they just, they're just doing it. It's part of their everyday process. And so I had a situation, because for us, we don't have finals. We have what we call exhibitions. So the students need to, at the end of each quarter, defend their learning and really show the different categories. Like, so, if I, again, fixing a car, like, how does that work with communication? Well, it's like, if I had to read an instruction manual and then interpret what's in the instruction manual to become a practical situation, then, that is communication, right? Because we all complain now, right? The adults complain when we buy something and there's no directions, right? So, having those manuals really helps kind of bridge that gap of, completing a task. And then it kind of goes on. But, so I had a student who was doing HVAC work, right? So he's working with these air conditioned units, all this stuff, right? And he's like, oh, yeah, I had a good day. Oh, I did this. Well, I was here, and he'd tell me stuff. And then literally one day while he was doing his exhibition, um, I said, okay, well, it's time to show your Unrulr. And I had seen some of the stuff on the Unrulr, but he had not like shared details. And all of a sudden, he is talking about extreme details of the things that he's doing. And he's like, well, the wiring was kind of messed up on this, and I had to rewire it, and this is what we have to do because we have to make sure. And he goes into all this detail. And his mom and I were sitting there with our mouths hanging open. We had no idea that you were doing all this stuff. And he goes, oh, yeah, well, and then on top of it, all the other things that he was doing to support what he was doing, right? So he had the HVAC stuff, but it's like he had to install it in a house. Well, the siding was messed up. So then he's doing siding work, and then he's doing concrete work, and then he's doing, all this other stuff. And it was just kind of nutty, on just based off of the fact that it's like, wow, you're doing like 10 times more than I thought you were doing because you're literally not talking about it. But he had all this visual evidence. And for them, I think when they take the pictures, they don't necessarily remember, right? So they're like, oh, yeah, I did this. But then as he was like remembering, he's like, oh, yeah, and that was a really long job. And then it did this. And then we had he was talking about his customer service skills because, the homeowner's upset because it was only supposed to take a day, but then they found something wrong and needed to make sure that, the house wasn't going to burn down because wiring was messed up, and, all these things. And it's like, wow, you are really doing way more than I thought you were doing, because you're only gone on Tuesdays and Thursdays every week.
I mean, that's the power of evidence, right? And I think like why I took this job is that when multimedia can be a part of that evidence, it not only reduces friction, it's just a lot more human centered in being able to share that out. I love that story because it allowed a learner to have confidence and pride in not just a slick presentation, but the
Right.
actual evidence of what they were doing. How did you build that into the culture? Not just on ruler usage, but like this level of reflection. Did they have to have an exit ticket, at the end of each day when they were using Unruler off campus? How did you get that student to have all of this great documentation?
Well, in their DNA, they want to do assignments, right? Right. We all use Google Classroom, and so I how to start it was just really making it an assignment. Is doing like I just need one picture for one day that you're out doing your thing, and then I also implemented it into my advisory. So then the students are like, because I don't know you, right? I get these kids, and sometimes it's the first year that I have them, and so for me, it's like having them take a picture of their cat, having them take a picture. I was out at the beach with my family and we found,
Totally.
mussels, and we did this. So all of a sudden now I have all these connections to all these students that I didn't have before. And so even having like, because they all have, they're all carrying phones, right? So they have this computer device that, and they like to take pictures. So all this photographic evidence now enriches their exhibition so that we're not doing the boring, oh, I'm just, here's my 10 slides that you asked me for. I'm going to put, they never put bullets. They always put like paragraphs in there and they're like, what's wrong with that? But now I get to see pictures. And what that also does is it allows the students that are here observing this exhibition to go, oh, I noticed that you did this. Can you tell me a little bit more about that picture? Or sometimes they'll take pictures of their JC assignments, because we also have a partnership with the junior college. And so they'll say, oh, for my communications class I had to do this, or I had to paint this, or I had to do whatever. So now the student gets to share like their kind of outside experience with their classmates. And then that really, what I've noticed is, since using this, is that it brings them closer together, and it allows them to connect on a different level, because socially now they're like, oh, you like to fish, I like to fish. And then all of a sudden now I'm hearing like, hey, do you want to go fishing after school, and all this stuff. So it's like so many different levels, right? So it's extending their learning and deepening their learning, right? Like reaffirming the learning. It is helping them up their game socially, because sometimes, not everybody is like, hi, my name is, kind of thing, right? That may be too much, but it allows them to connect on that personal social level, and they get to comment. And then as an educator, me introducing competencies that they're not quite sure about, because it's a big word, and we're still working on getting it as part of our curriculum and to our institutional language. So they get to choose competencies. So they're saying like, this is how I like to learn. This is, this is what I'm learning about science, and plugging that in. And I mean, it's just, for me, it's fantastic because it really is deepening their learning. And I didn't get that before when I was handing out worksheets and read this chapter and do whatever. Like, there was no room or latitude for students to be unique. There was no latitude for them to be creative, right? And so when we brought them back, like when we bring them into our school, that's one of the things, like they freak out because we're asking them to be creative, and they haven't been creative for a period of time. So they're like, this is too much. So I think like taking pictures allows them to start to open that again, and gives them an opportunity to just have fun. School's supposed to be fun.
I mean, what were the in Unruler school is supposed to be fun. There's supposed to be joy. There's supposed to be collaboration, and you know how there's like a Hippocratic oath in medicine. Like there
There's
needs to
no
be one in
harm.
there needs to be one in education because schools harm kids. I feel like even great schools, it's like how do we harm kids the least, right? Like how do we how do we empower, we have to run them through this thing, but how do we how do we just
Well,
try?
and it's crazy because, like I've always been that person where I let my students drive their learning and their experience. I've just always had to do it like, undercover before because, people didn't like that. They wanted test scores, they
Oh
wanted
my
whatever.
God.
And so a number of years ago, and it's probably about 15 years ago, I had a group of students and, I said, look, when did things go sideways for you in school? Like, when did you notice that you struggled?
Mm, mm.
And they were like junior high.
Yeah. Oh,
And
100%.
and I was like, oh, yeah, I totally get that. And I was like, well, tell me about your struggles. And they're like, the changing of the classes, the different teachers, the different educational expectations. This English teacher wants this math teacher wants that. And then also the hormones and the social aspect, right? Of, do you like me? Are you going to be my friend? Oh, I don't like her because she wore Nikes instead of Converse, like all the weird stuff that happens at middle school. And so they created a conference and they're like, we're going to do this. So I had them, we called it the Youth Empowerment Conference and we brought in different people. It was like, who do you want to hear from? And they did all these different things. And it was fantastic because they brought in like outside mentors who were willing to talk to kids and to have them have an experiential kind of learning day where they got to move around, and then we provided lunch and we did all this stuff, and the kids did everything. Like they provided, quote unquote security, and so they had radios and all this stuff, right? But they got to create this because they wanted students in middle school to understand that there was something beyond, that kind of tight experience.
Totally.
Now, a few years ago, I asked the students the same question. I said, well, when did things start going sideways for you? And they're like, second grade. So in 15 years, they have dropped down to like, and damaging things, right? Doing harm have been, voiced to these children at 7, 8 years old. You'll never amount to anything. You're not really that smart, or, like the things that I hear that they say. And I'm not sure why adults do that and what their purpose is, but these children are not letting these things go. And for me, that just absolutely destroys me. And so for me, my passion is that I'm going to build you up. For whatever period of time I have you, I'm going to give you confidence. I'm going to teach you your own boundaries so that you know how to set them and make people, respect your boundaries and give you a voice that you felt like was lost as a result of whatever harm somebody did when you were 7 years old.
No, that really resonates with me. Personally, I moved from Lesotho in Southern Africa to Massachusetts around the age of 7 and was in a joyful, loving learning community and was in the complete opposite. And and it wasn't until I had someone like you, try not to tear up, um,
It's
sophomore year of
okay. I have those
so,
feelings.
sophomore year of high school and then college, where I saw my worth as a learner and as a human being. Yeah, I mean, I think like I love how you talked about documentation and evidence in Unruler, not just for projects or products, but for identity and who we are as people, where culture is visible, right? Where who we are is visible. And that was kind of the starting place of how a lot of schools use it. Freddie Veras is one of my favorite human beings, a big picture learning, I don't know, advisor, teacher, amazing human being. And in Unruler, there's an ability to take your competencies or skills or values and turn them into tags or badges, right? And Freddie said, social reasoning is important, communication is important, but joy always needs to be, we call them cogs in Unruler, kind of badge in
Right.
Unruler. And I love that. I love that he's always thinking about how we document joyful moments in our learning communities too. How did you use those cogs and Unruler to have learners build confidence in their growth? Like how did that play a role in being able to actually document and assess this style of education?
I think, well, one, I had Freddie come down because I was struggling at
Yeah,
first.
Freddie's a rock star.
And so he came and spoke to my students, and it was awesome because, Freddie's awesome. So to have him just in there, and the kids were like, we don't know this guy, but he's really cool. And we're going to listen to him. And I was like, yeah, there we go. But he came down and we talked about it. And the first thing, was not have the kids trip on the details. It's like, take pictures of stuff that you want to take pictures of, and then we will figure out where they fit in terms of the competencies. And then as time went on, I just noticed that they started going, oh, this is this. And there is the joy one, right? And they stick with that, right? Just for the, pure joy. And it's funny what, different students think joy is. But that's, we are
such a good point. Such a good point.
We're as different as our fingerprints. And those learners are the same way, right? They are very different. And if anything, two students could do the same thing and find, two different ways of looking at it, or get two different bits of information from the same piece. And I believe that by using Unrulr, that honors that, and because I have students, at multiple students at one site. And so it's fun to see like how somebody, looks at, oh, I painted, where somebody sees it as like, this is my artistic expression. And somebody is like, oh, I had to figure out how much paint I needed for the size of the room. And, and the whole mathematical piece of it, like knowing about square footage and, how much a gallon of paint covers. And that is fantastic, and I think those moments allow students to feel like everything they are doing is valuing. As an educator, it allows me to connect with the student to see what is curious, like what's curious to them. And that I use that to get closer to them, to understand what their needs are, their educational needs, and then how we can go from there.
I mean, you're truly differentiating. I love I took this job because of the communal nature of this tool, right? And the ability for learners to learn from each other just as much as they're learning from the quote unquote advisor or educator. And there's so many examples, your schools in North Carolina, Hawaii, where it's not just the own learner's post and reflection that's so valuable. It's seeing other learners learning, right? And how they think about the world, the internship that they did, right? Mm-hmm. Or like you said, how it might be the exact same experience, but how beautiful it is that one experience resonates so differently with the other. Like within Unrulr and in other spaces in your learning community, why is it so important for learners to engage with other learners learning? Sorry, it was a confusing way of putting it. But
so that they're not alone.
Right.
So they're not alone.
They're not alone. I love that.
Students are often, due to technology and whatever, they often feel isolated. When you're on Instagram, it's like trying to get the best picture at the best angle of this moment in time that you think is wonderful, but it may have been crappy, but they're just like, I'm going to make it work and do whatever. Unrulr is just raw to a certain extent, right? This is me fishing. This is me with my dog. I had one student the other day who was like, I was on the ferry, and I'm like, what is the ferry like? And then we start talking about ferries, and then we start talking about it, and then the class takes off because then we're talking about transportation. Oh, have you been on this train? Oh, that train's disgusting. This one, and then it started this whole thing about like public transportation and the differences around the country for public
authentic learning.
Right. And so then they leave with this knowledge, but it just gives them the opportunity to connect. And, they connect with their learning, they connect with me, they're connecting with their classmates. And just like I said, the moments I say, like, I had no idea that these kids were fishing, right? Like I had one kid I have like 5 kids that like to fish. I didn't know that. But if it wasn't until the student posted his pictures fishing and they're like, oh, you like that? I like this. And then so I had a kid like yesterday who was out tuna fishing. So when he gets back, we're all going to talk about his tuna fishing and everything that he's doing, right? And how cool that was and whatever. So I think that they get to share an authentic side of them that is not for like, I don't know, just like me showing off. And I think that's it, is that Unrulr allows them to just be honest and just be themselves. And it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to whatever, but it's who they are. And I think that sometimes social media isn't who they are, right? And that's the depressive issue, right? With students is that they're scrolling through and they're seeing these people who weigh 115 pounds and have no body fat, and they think that's what they need to look like. Those types of things. And here I know you already, but I'm saying like, oh, you went to the beach with your family on Sunday, right? And then I get to discuss that, or you learn something. Oh, I see you did this. Oh, I've worked with that type, like kids were talking about units, or you're talking about big vehicles that they drive, during their internships or whatever. That gives them an opportunity. And then they start, if I listen, then other students start joining in the conversation because they're like, oh, you were at this place? I know so-and-so. Do you know him? And then I'm watching all the connections. So I really think that just not, learning by themselves or feeling like they're alone is probably the core of this. And, that connection is everything, right? I mean, that reduces anxiety. It reduces depression. All that mental health stuff. And, it's unintended, right? Because for me, initially, it was like, hey, I just need you to document your stuff, right? And then I'm watching all this other stuff come from it. And I'm like, this is way more, and it's protected, right? Because nobody else has access to this, right? There's a safety in it. Like even for other classrooms, right? Nobody can see what they post for advisory. It's just between them. And so it does create that familial type engagement that I don't know, like sometimes I get it and sometimes I don't, right? Depending on the students. But I think this is definitely a tool to help me get closer to that a little bit faster and not taking like half the year.
I love that. I mean, I think for me as a teacher using it before I joined, it was a differentiation tool. A learner might not feel comfortable writing a 5-paragraph essay about who she is or where she comes from. She may not feel comfortable in an in-the-moment Brene Brown circle sit where we share our feelings and our values. But video or audio might be a space where she can show. And if you don't have it, you're never going to get to see who that learner is or what they worked on. So it's vital that we present different modalities and different ways for them to capture who they are and what they're learning.
For sure. And again, it's just, I kind of feel sorry for the people who don't use that or have that type of access because of the fact that, that student may be in the back, like, I don't know, like I used to post about my dog, right? Because, she would do weird things and all. And the dog had a story, right? She was rescued from Afghanistan through a military pet program. And when she passed away, I kind of, put something in there or whatever. And then I came to school and like, I got notes from kids. They're like, so sorry you lost your dog. And I was like, holy smokes. Like, not that I was shooting for that, but it's like, because they got to know her by seeing her in pictures, they felt like they knew her. So then it was a loss, and then that made me feel not alone. Right. That these, that the students are recognizing that this may be a hard time for me, as a result of it. And again, it's like, I'm not going to walk in and go, hey, my dog died, feel sorry for me.
Right.
But just by, that and hearing that or seeing that, knowing, then it allows them to kind of exercise their empathy skill.
And it creates classroom culture. When you're in a community and you care about people and you're learning together, you're more willing to be vulnerable. You're more willing to try, right? Like just like an athlete on a sports team, right? Like, or a musician in a performance when they're a part of something bigger. I think you create that in your learning communities. When I talk to people about you and your work, you seem to be this culture creator and purveyor of culture. What are you proud of as an educator and as someone who works with youth?
Well, I call myself, I feel like a cheerleader at times, right? And
I
that's
hear
still
that.
not
I hear
me.
that.
Like, if you know me, like, I'm not really a rah-rah kind of person, but I think that probably what I'm most proud of is the ability to observe a situation and know how to help a learner achieve their best version of themselves. is just my observational skills. And because, you have some students who come in and are like, you're an adult, you're a teacher, go away, don't come near me, that kind of thing. And then you have, of course, the easy ones are the ones that are just like, oh, yeah, let me tell you everything about my life. And you're like, okay, that's maybe a little much kind of thing. But I think that knowing how to read a room, right? Because and even as like a new teacher, that's a skill that needs to be acquired, right? If I'm lecturing for 45 minutes and the kids are drooling on the table and I don't notice because I'm not looking up for my stuff, then something's wrong, and I'm willing to stop and shift whatever I need to address the situation in the room, even if it's me sucking, right? I'm like, I will say, hey, wow, it's clear I'm sucking. Help me. What do we need to do? And they may have a thing, and then we just go that way. So probably observation and the ability to pivot.
Those are amazing skills to have as a teacher and just a human being. Why do you love big picture? I met you for the first time in person at the Big Bang conference in Kansas City. I loved those 3 days, to be with people that want to decolonize education, that want to not live in the status quo. What do you love about big picture learning?
Well, I've never been a great rule follower. And I love that big picture just took the rule book and threw it out the window. Because I believe there's an educational revolution that's needed. And I think that Dennis and the whole big picture crew, like they knew this from the beginning, that education sucked and that it wasn't building students up. It was really tearing them down and putting them into these boxes that were essentially inappropriate, right? And not really understanding how categorizing students in a negative light really influences their lives and beyond, right? I have kids that, 20 or 30 years ago, they're like, I remember what my kindergarten said to me. And it's like, holy moly, you're, 35 years old and you remember what happened, that amount of time. And they do. And I think that what they created was an empowering type situation for students. And it let them know that they have their own educational value. And I think that's what I like about it. And that's what appeals to me, is because I've always felt like, kids should be playing in dirt, right? They should be experimenting with things. They should be going out and making mistakes.
Preach.
And knowing that that mistake is feedback, right? It's not failure, it's feedback. And that by having that feedback, that's going to allow me to make easier adjustments as I age. And I wish it was just really about the subject matter, but a lot of times I find myself talking to students about their personal stuff and, relationships with their, people, and helping them navigate the same thing. And I think that this model allows me that time to do that, because that's something I always hear from teachers, even when I go to conferences and I present on what I'm doing. The number one thing teachers will say, I don't have time for that. And it's like, okay, well, if I don't spend the first few weeks building a culture in my classroom where students trust me and they can trust one another, I'm going to fight that all year long. But because I spend those first 2 weeks creating a culture, I have no discipline problems throughout the year. And it's like, if that can save me, how many weeks do we teach? 33 weeks or something like that, 36 weeks. If that can save me 33 weeks of fighting with a student to try to make them do something that they don't want to do, I'd rather do something like that than just buzz along because I have to keep my time and do whatever. But then I'm constantly dealing with Johnny in the corner, or, Jenny, who doesn't want to do X, Y, Z, and I have no idea who they are and why they're resisting, right? Because unfortunately, a lot of these students who come to us, and it's everybody, it's not necessarily my school, have educational trauma. And I think we have to navigate that. And we have to give them a chance to feel honored and understood.
I'm glad I muted myself because I was just saying yes loudly the entire time you were speaking. That's a really beautiful way of closing out this conversation. And I want to thank you for being on the front lines of that trauma. And I want to thank you for really transforming students' lives. And if they haven't been heard before they graduate, you being someone that can create community for them. Um, please share out this conversation with your learning community. Dana, where can people find you?
Let's see. They can. I don't know. There's so many things. We'll have to throw it in the show notes. I have my own, personal stuff, and then I also have our North Bay Med Academy is on Instagram, and you can see what our learners are doing. A lot of those pictures will, get shifted over towards their Unrulr kind of stuff, and then you can always find our website. I don't know what it is because
I'll throw it in the show notes.
that's awesome. We'll have to put it in there because they keep changing it. But yeah, you can just Google Dana Jones and you'll find a way to get in touch with me. And I'm in California, and I am available, especially if educators want to learn how to implement Unrulr. I am more than willing to show you what I have. And of course, Aaron, you're also a wonderful resource in supporting us.
Not as cool as you, but
but I'm just a few hours earlier. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, you can find us on unrulr.com, unrulr.com. You can find us on YouTube, where this conversation will live. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter and all the spaces. Amplify. The whole purpose of this podcast is to amplify the work of Dana, and to amplify, I don't know, just these champions in education. And so please share this out with your learning community. Watch it, share it, reflect, use it as a teaching tool with your teachers. A huge mahalo for being here.